What's up, everyone? Shane Santacroce here, and as always, we're going to make it happen. I am in the studio today with Eric Clayman, criminal defense attorney in South Florida. We have a lot of fun and interesting information, so make sure you're paying attention. Please make sure you like, subscribe, follow, and listen, man, the information we're going to talk about today is detrimental. We're going to talk about some DUI stuff, possibly some criminal stuff, what you should do in a situation if you're pulled over, if you've had a drink or two. So, Eric, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
So, Eric, let's talk about a little bit about you. Let's get to know you. I want everybody to understand who you are. Why I recommend you so much to everybody as a criminal defense attorney. And let's start from the roots, man. Where are you from originally?
I grew up outside of Detroit, Michigan.
Detroit, Michigan. What was that like?
It's awesome. It was a good place to grow up. Midwest, different value system and structuring than what's down here in South Florida. Not in a negative way. It's just different. And then eventually it led me to South Florida. It's a long story.
Yeah, I feel like, South Florida is such a very different place in general from all over. And anytime I speak to somebody that's really from the Northeast, Northwest, et cetera, they talk about those fundamental differences, and positive or negative, however you look at it is up to you. But it is a very, very different environment for sure. So from Michigan, where'd you go to school?
So, excuse me, I grew up in the suburbs of Detroit, so I went to some of the local schools that are down there. I ended up going to Eastern Michigan University for college. Partway through, I decided I didn't know how I felt about college. I was kind of a screw up when I was younger, and I ended up, oddly enough, in a police academy with zero direction, and that was at the Washtenaw County Community College Police Academy. I ended up graduating the academy. I went into the academy without having a job waiting for me, which meant I paid to get into the academy on my own just to see what happened. And I ended up linking up with the police department afterwards called Hamtramck Police Department. Hamtramck is a small 2.2 square mile city, completely engulfed by the city of Detroit, and it's adjacent to Highland Park. So for any football fans, that's where Jerome Bettis is from. So in those two areas, what makes it interesting is all the transient drug traffic that moves through the city of Detroit comes through those two cities because it's completely encapsulated by the city of Detroit. So it was a very quick comeuppance into how I grew up and what I thought the world was like as to what really went down in the hood, so to speak. And it was a wonderful experience. I love being there.
So what was the transition like, right? Because that's obviously a pretty big transition, being an officer in the Detroit area, and then you end up being a criminal defense attorney in South Florida. Talk about that transition. How did that happen?
So initially, I never wanted anything to do with defense work. That's not something I ever thought I wanted to do. I was a cop. I finally found purpose. I enjoyed helping people. And I'm not talking about running around there, giving people speeding tickets and, putting cuffs on Junior because he stole mom's BMW. Nobody gave a shit about it. Can we swear on this?
Yeah, you can do whatever.
Nobody cared. Nobody cared about any of that at all. We got to deal with some real heavy hitters. And then I was a part of a team that arrested a guy that was a really bad dude. He kept a 14-year-old girl in his basement and raped her with his person, baseball bats, firearms, you name it. And her life, I'm sure, ultimately ended up being destroyed. But at the end of the day, what happened was there was a contamination issue and a chain of custody issue. And the guy ended up doing about 3 months in county, and the charges all fell apart.
Wow.
Shortly after that, I was on my way home from work. I was still a cop as a year at that point. I was on my probationary period. And I got in a roadside altercation with a state trooper. And that's what took me out of law enforcement. And then I ended up eventually becoming a financial advisor, believe it or not, at Morgan Stanley, which did not work well. I'm a 21-year-old punk trying to convince, old 65-year-old, 70-year-old men to try to give me $3 million to invest, which I didn't even know my asshole from a hole in the ground. So it didn't really matter. That wasn't for me. I ended up applying to law school. This is a funny joke, so you can have fun with this. And this is true. When I applied, my dad's a physician. And the reason I say that is I always was under the impression that someone like me with my fairly crappy education and my grades in the past, that I could never get into a regular law school like you can for medical school. So when I applied to law school, I applied to St. Thomas. And I thought St. Thomas was actually in the Virgin Islands. Much like when you can't get into an accredited medical school and you go out to the islands and then you take your boards and you come back in. So I applied to St. Thomas. I applied to Cooley Law School in Michigan and Detroit College of Law, which is part of Michigan State. Everybody said no to me except for St. Thomas. So I was excited and I thought I was going to the islands. And then I looked at the welcome packet, and lo and behold, it was in Miami, Florida. And that was it. And I was really excited to go. And I got in my 1994 Honda Accord and drove from West Bloomfield, Michigan to the Palmetto down here. And never went back.
Well, at least you got somewhat close to the islands, right? Miami. I mean, it's close enough.
It's continental U.S., so that was a big upgrade. Exactly. I didn't expect that.
That's actually kind of a funny story right there. We got to make sure we put that in. So you end up in here. You come down here for law school. You know, I deal with a lot of attorneys, and it's interesting because I hear no middle ground for law school. It's either one or the other. It was either an amazing experience or they were just kind of partying their ass off and somehow made it through law school. What was your experience like to law school?
Law school for me was a completely awesome experience. Like I said, I had never had grades going into law school. My old man was an overachiever, really well-known, kind of a surgeon guy, speaks multiple languages. So I just kind of checked out as a young age. I never did shit in school. I was a massive disappointment. As a matter of fact, my parents kicked me out when I was 16. So I've been on my own since I was 16 years old. I ended up getting into law school. I had never been a student before. I ended up knowing some people that I met earlier in life that happened to live in this Miami area, and they got me in the wrong spot really quickly. I mean, I partied my balls off my first year of law school. So I went to St. Thomas. It's a Catholic school. So the way it works at St. Thomas and most law schools like Nova and everywhere else is you have an academic curve and there's probation. Mind you, I'd never been a student before. So my first semester of law school, I think I got like a 1.7. My second semester, I got like a 1.3, which really meant that I just gifted the Catholics about 60 grand. You know what I mean? Exactly. And that was it. And I needed like a 3.71 or something like that in the next semester to get my cumulative up over a 2.5 to stay in law school. And I had no idea how the hell this was going to happen because I like literally, it's embarrassing, but it's true. So I'll own it. The only book I ever read in my life, cover to cover, like every word prior to that was Spaceballs and the paperback edition, no less. So starting my second semester, I quit hanging out with all my buddies. And these are guys that I'm still friends with to this day that have become pretty successful. Stopped hanging out with all my buddies. And I just married the library. And I was there till like 3:30 every morning. Oddly enough, I ended up finding a lot of solitude and peace in it. And I really enjoyed it. And I found out that this was maybe more my speed than I thought. Didn't know what the grades were going to look like. Took those final exams. Ended up with about a 3.8 on the dean's list. So I made it past the curve and I was staying in law school. And from that point on, I guess I just learned I can do this. And before it was just, you know, afraid to commit, afraid to fail, everything that everybody goes through, which there's no harm in that. There's no shame in that. That's just kind of the way that it is. And then from that point on, the one of the deans at the school at that point had me start speaking to like all the matriculating classes. Basically, they were like, look, if this yokel could do it, you can do it. And I just talked to the kids very honestly about what I had gone through and what I think that you need to do to succeed. And it worked for a lot of people. And I'm really grateful because at the time that I went into law school, Bob Butterworth was the new dean. If you don't know the name Robert Butterworth, that's a former attorney general in Florida. And many, many moons ago, he was a sheriff in Broward County. I was a cop. I think that had a lot to do with him letting me in because when he let me in, my grades, I had like a 2.1 GPA and my LSAT was like a 120. It was like literally embarrassing. But I had done quite a bit as a law enforcement officer and I was older than the average member of the student body. So perhaps they thought that I might be able to round out that student body a little bit. And in the end, it was a good decision, but it certainly didn't look like it for the first year that I was there. And then I ended up just kind of going from there.
So, you know, you bring up a good point here because rough beginnings, but you turned it into a positive with work ethic, you know, perseverance, patience. There's probably a lot of people having that same experience now or afraid to take that next step in fear of that experience, right? Mm-hmm. So what would be your message or advice to someone that's about to take that step or has taken it and is facing those similar obstacles?
So great question because you're the one that got me into like looking at things like Instagram, TikTok, things like that. And there are all these little skits about people going to law school and lawyers urging other people not to do it. And it is such a crock of shit. It's out of control. Being a lawyer is amazing because it gives you the opportunity to have a skill set and help people. Now, whether you want to be a degenerate and be lazy and just complain and do nothing and be a company person, that's on you. That's not who I am. I mean, I'm sitting here as my own boss. I'm not saying that to be arrogant, but I can't work for others. I don't play well with others, and I'm not going to break my neck to make some other guy or gal ton of money. I'll do that for myself. I'll do that for my family. So I think it's an amazing thing to do. If you have, and then there's all these, you know, skits about the bad debt and you're owing 180 grand and you're owing this. Who cares? Pay it back. And it's subsidized by the government. It's the best debt that you can have. There are tons of write-offs that you can use that you could kind of pair up with it. It's not a bad thing to have. I'd rather be making $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year and have a $200,000 debt than have no debt and be making $21 an hour.
I agree. And so, as you know, I've worked with dozens, hundreds literally of attorneys over my career, building law firms and whatnot. And I've gotten a very good, I guess, understanding of the differences in attorneys. And I'm very, very picky about who I work with now in the law fields, only because it's such a stark difference between a good attorney and an attorney. And what I mean by that is the typical attorney, like you said, went to law school, has a tremendous amount of debt, and they're just doing what they need to do to get by. And especially in the criminal defense side, then you have attorneys like yourself, who I personally use you and recommend you to everybody because of your work ethic and your passion within your cases. I've never worked with a criminal defense attorney that takes so much pride in defending their clients, right? So for me personally, that was my decision-making process, is watching you work with other clients, and it didn't matter what you needed to do, how above and beyond you had to go. You really cared about that person's innocence and their fair fight in the battle, right? So that was a stark difference that I realized in you, and now I kind of see where that all comes from.
Can I make a comment on that?
Please.
It's not necessarily that I cared about their innocence, because some of the people that I get, and I'm fortunate, I do believe are innocent. But that's not a part of the equation. It's not my job to judge whether or not somebody is guilty or innocent. All I'm doing on my case is, whether you're guilty of sin or not, is there doubt, and is there another fact pattern that can be written? And we have a constitution. It's called due process. You get to prosecute people, and people get to defend themselves. It's on the government and the prosecution's job. It's their job to prove it, make them prove it. Very few of the times am I up there really advocating for someone, because in my heart of hearts, I believe that they're innocent. To be quite frank with you, on 99% of the clients that I have, I've got no fucking clue whether they're innocent or not, because I don't ask them. And if they even start wanting to run their mouth and telling me about what they did or they didn't do, I shut them down pretty quickly, because I'm an ethical lawyer and I'm not going to commit a fraud on the court. So if they tell me that they did something, I'm not going to lead them down a road to testify where I know that they're lying and I'm a part of it. I don't want to hear a damn thing out of your mouth about whether you did or you didn't do it. All I want to hear about is, what can you tell me about what they're alleging, and what angles can we create based on that? And that's where the doubt comes from. And it's not that I don't have people that I have killed myself for, people that really are innocent. And those are the amazing cases when they come along, but those are also the cases that will kill you, because those are the ones that sometimes you can't succeed on. And when you really know that, then you failed them. And at the end of the day, that's on you.
So again, it's interesting, right? So it's not so much about the concern for the innocence, but it's the legal process and making sure everyone has a fair representation during that legal process.
100%.
That's where your passion comes from.
If you can play that game, and if you happen to be better than the one that you're playing it against, you're going to win, my man. Of course you can lose. It happens. Yeah. I have a very good trial record, and I'm not afraid to try anything. I'll try anything from petty misdemeanors to first-degree murder. And at the end of the day, none of that shit frightens me. I get excited about it. I get nervous, as you should. You're going up to the plate and you're in the World Series. Derek Jeter, I'm sure his heart beats when he's about to take an at-bat. It should. The day that I don't have fear is the day that I won't do this anymore. But I completely get off on it. I absolutely love doing it, and it makes me feel just as alive as one can feel. And because you have one human being or their family or an entire group so hyper-focused on you and relying on you to get them to a particular destination, that's a pretty amazing, awesome responsibility to have for somebody, right? So if you actually care about that, you're going to do whatever you can to win. And when I say whatever you can, I don't mean that in the literal sense of the term, where, I'm not suggesting that people off witnesses and do all this crazy thing that you would see in movies and all that other nonsense, but I'll fight like hell to get what I need. What's embarrassing and what the problem is with lawyers, you've been out with me, you're a friend of mine, we'll go drink it, we're at a bar. Someone comes up and talks to me and asks me what I do for a living. I'll tell them I'm a fucking janitor, because everyone thinks lawyers are assholes, and they're not. But the problem is, most of them really are. So how many lawyers am I hanging out with when I'm outside of my profession? The only one that I know that's every day is my wife. And I met her at law school, and she ain't a criminal defense attorney. You know what I mean? It's got nothing to do with that. So I don't spend time with those people, because typically people are doing it. They feel that they're owed something. I've got an education and you got to pay me X because of that. You're a moron. You are exactly worth what you can convince someone to pay you. So if I got a guy that comes to me with a murder case, but all I could do is convince him to pay me $20, and I'm dumb enough to agree to that retainer, I made my bed and I have to lay in it, right? That's really the way that this shit works. It's really simple. So if you have someone that's willing to do the job, that's not just going to hit you up for money every time you do it. If you ran my books and you know some of them because you've seen them in the past, if you look at what I'm doing, you have any idea how much money that I've left on the street. And I could be withdrawing from cases. I can quit on people. And every once in a blue moon I do. But that's only when the relationship has become so bad over money that they ignore me and they don't want to talk to me because they're afraid that I'm going to not do what they want to do. If I can't talk to a client, I can't represent them. You know what I mean? That's about the only time that that'll ever happen. I've gotten screwed over so many times on it, and I'm dumb enough to keep taking the next one and the next one and the next one because I really love what I'm doing. And I'm never going to change that. So if you want to succeed with a criminal defense lawyer anywhere, find someone that will talk to you, that's communicative. So don't hire them on the first go. Set them up. Hey, I'm going to want to talk to you here. I'm going to want to talk to you again. Send them an email. See if these idiots respond. See if they do that, because lawyers are super, super thoughtful and on the ball until you've hired them.
Believe me, I know.
You know what I mean? And if you look at me, you've been around me. My wife will tell you anybody else. I got guys that call me from the jail on Christmas Day at 4 a.m. just to ask me when their next court date is in February. I'd lose it on them sometimes, sure, but I'm still willing to answer the call to give them hell. You know what I mean?
Yep. Listen, if you're just tuning in right now, we're here at Eric Clayman, criminal defense attorney in the South Florida area. And really pay attention here because you don't really get this perspective from an attorney who's just being brutally honest and transparent. We're not here talking about bullshit and fluffing your ears to something that you want to hear. It's true transparency on what you should and shouldn't expect from an attorney. And a lot of legal advice coming up as well. I'm sorry, not necessarily legal advice, but some pretty solid opinions on what you should and shouldn't do. You find yourself in a rough situation with law enforcement. So make sure you stay tuned right here. Like, subscribe, follow, and make sure you reach out to Eric Clayman. If you have any issues, phone number is on the screen, and you will have his contact information in the description below. So, all right, so let's talk a little bit. One of the big issues we deal with, especially here in South Florida, is DUIs. And, a lot of people don't really understand what they should do, one, when they first get pulled over, and then, of course, all the steps that come after that. So let's talk about that a little bit. And I know you can't necessarily give legal advice, but, what should somebody do when they're in a position, they may have had a drink or two, hopefully they're not over that limit, but they get pulled over, what should they do?
In terms of a DUI and advice, you can rely on what I'm saying if you're in the state of Florida, more so than if you're in a different state. Okay. Now, and in terms of legal advice, that really deals with how the statutes are created, the elements of those statutes, and what the prosecuting authority has to prove. But for anybody in any state, it starts with getting pulled over, right? So if you get pulled over for DUI, first understand what DUI means. Everybody assumes that it's driving under the influence of alcohol. It's an open statute. If you look at the information of the charging document, it's driving under the influence of something. That's what it is. It could be for weed. It could be for coke. It could be you could technically be DUI for too much Tylenol or Advil PMs or Benadryl if it can be proved. So it doesn't matter what the substance is, but the most prevalent is alcohol. So here's what you do if you get pulled over for a DUI. It takes some discipline. And if you listen to what I'm saying, you're going to beat your DUI. I'm telling you. Number one, when the officer stops you, they're going to make observations. So your behavior is important. Don't be a prick. You got all these idiots that are filming cops and that are telling them and trying to push them. And I don't need to give you my ID, and I don't need to submit to this, and I don't need to submit to that. You're a fucking idiot. You're not going to win a fight with a cop on the side of the road. All right. You're just not going to do it. You're doing it because you want people to look at you and get your like here and get your like there. But at the end of the day, it ain't going to work out for you. If you want to be successful on a DUI stop, be polite. One of the things that officers look for with their interpretations of how you behave are mood swings and how you act. That's indicative of impairment. So everything that you're doing is being monitored. So don't be a moron. Just be polite, have the car turned off, roll the window down. Don't start getting your documents in order before you get there, because then the cops are going to say that they saw furtive movements, and before you know it, they're going to come up with a BS reason to start searching your car. Don't give them that opportunity. Just pull over, stop. How you doing, officer? What can I do for you? And it goes from there. They're going to ask you two things if they believe that you are suspected for being DUI. All right. They're going to ask you to submit to SFSTs, which are standard field sobriety tests or exercises. And then they're eventually going to ask you to provide a breath sample. And if you're smart, you are going to say no. to each and every one of them. And you're going to be polite about it. And in your mind, you're going to be telling yourself, I'm not getting arrested, even though what appears to be a fairly nice DUI investigator is giving me the opportunity to talk my way out of this. It's not going to happen. You're not going to talk your way out of anything. This is what they get paid to do. They get paid to jam you up and to arrest you for DUIs. That's why they have DUI task forces and they call for DUI investigators, because they want to create that arrest. Commit to going to jail, losing 8 hours of your life, paying some sort of a low bond or being on pretrial release, get out. And if you don't do standard field sobriety exercises, which are going to be recorded by the officer's body cams and some departments' dash cams, they cannot put in front of a jury how you're walking, what your gait is, what are you staggering, are you swaying? None of that's there because you're not given them the opportunity to get anything, which means you're not providing the government with evidence to then convict you of being impaired. The next issue is going to be submitting to a breath test. First, you'd have to understand what that really means. You blow into an intoxilizer, 8,000 or whatever it's called these days, and it gives you a presumptive reading for what your breath alcohol limit is, okay? Or for what your breath is. Then once you've been arrested for the DUI, you're going to go to an observational facility. So for in Broward County, that's called the BAT facility, the breath alcohol testing facility. And there they're going to use a different type of equipment to get a better breath reading on you, okay? You're going to say no to all of it because if you're dumb enough to do it, because you think you can pass it, even though you have no clue, and it comes back with a presumptive positive, meaning you're 0.08 or greater, any juror is going to sit there with the mindset that you were impaired. Because what the law stands for is this. If you are 0.08, you're presumed to be impaired. But as the word presumption implies that there's also a rebuttable presumption, which means we could try to argue that you weren't, okay? And then if you blow a 0.05 or less, then you're presumptively not impaired. But if you know you had something to drink, don't be an idiot. Just say no. Like literally go back to Nancy Reagan and her logo. Just say no and be nice about it. And then they got nothing. At the end of the day, what the government or state will try to prove at that time, their case is simply going to be an officer telling you what they think your traffic pattern was for the 20 seconds that they followed you before you pulled you over. And that's it. They literally got bupkis. It's over.
So let me ask you, and I don't know if this is still a law or a rule or maybe just rumor, but, I was always told that if you don't take the field sobriety, you don't blow, then you're almost guaranteed a conviction or a year license suspension. Is there any consequence to not doing all of that when it's requested?
Sure. So what happens is when you sign for your driver's license in the state of Florida, you agree to give what's called implied consent. So if an officer asks for that, you're supposed to do it. But we're supposed to do a lot of things that we're told to do that we don't do as human beings, right? I would rather deal with an administrative issue with the DMV and having to go back and forth with, is my license suspended? Do I apply for a hardship? Am I going to have some restrictions on my license? That's a lot easier for me to deal with than having a DUI. What's important for people to know, especially in the state of Florida, is if you plead out to a DUI or if you're convicted of a DUI, it's a mandatory adjudication. So you will now have a criminal record for the rest of your life, no matter what. There's no withholds. There's none of this other stuff that are terms of art that we use where you can legally say you've not been convicted of this offense. If you plead out in a plea to a DUI, you are adjudicated guilty of the DUI. You can never expunge or seal any other type of offense again in your life. And you're not convicted as a felon, but you've now been convicted of a crime. It's a part of your criminal history in your jacket, and it will be there for the rest of your life. I would much rather deal with pissing around with the DMV and trying to figure out my driver's license date than dealing with the conviction. Now,
and still needing to deal with all that stuff anyway.
You will have to anyways. But here's what's interesting. If the first time you get pulled over and you refuse to blow, that's the kind of penalties that you and I are talking about right now. Now, if you get pulled over a second time for a subsequent DUI, okay, and then at that point you refuse to blow again with a prior refusal, they can now charge you criminally for a failure to provide a breath sample. And that is the same exact punishment as a DUI. So then on the next go around, you're going to have a DUI crime and you're going to have the failure. And you're going to have the failure to submit to a breath testing. So then you end up with 2. So you could be facing 2 years in jail instead of 1 year in jail. And what's really quirky, and I'm not going to blow your mind yet, is in a criminal case, the state has to prove beyond and to the exclusion of a reasonable doubt that someone committed a crime. If it's a failure to provide a breath sample, it's different in the state of Florida. They have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the officer had probable cause to ask you to give a breath sample. So it's literally like chopping that burden in half. I actually just won one recently in Broward County, which is very rare to do. And the only reason I did that is because the cop was just a complete schmuck, and he didn't like the state attorney that was prosecuting the case. And when the state tried to admit the him giving implied consent to the suspect, to my client, to the driver at the time, the officer said he didn't recognize the video. So because he said he didn't recognize the video, I was able to exclude the video and no video came in. But without that, I would have been sunk.
Interesting. So you see, this is why we have Eric on today, and really giving you guys an insight to some of the things you should and should not do. So again, if you're just tuning in, pay attention, go back and rewind this video after it comes out, and really, really listen, because there's a lot of things that I'm learning today as well. I'm sure a lot of you are. And it's very easy to screw yourself up by not taking just some of the simplest steps possible and making sure you have the proper representation. So Eric, let's talk about now. So we know what we do. We get pulled over. Be polite. Don't submit to these tests. And you're going to go to jail one way or the other, right? They're taking you in. So do your 8 hours, bond out. What's the next step? So I just went through this process. I did what Eric Clayman told me to do. What's next?
Hire a lawyer. You got to find a lawyer. If you think that you're going to represent yourself, you're putz. I mean, I'm a lawyer. I wouldn't represent myself. There's a very famous saying, anybody who represents themselves is a fool for a client, because you're now going to be emotionally involved in what's going on. And you have to understand how evidence works. You have to understand how criminal procedure works and motion practice. So hire a lawyer. Within 10 days of your DUI arrest, you individually or your lawyer, if they provide that service, will have to reach out to the Department of Motor Vehicles to start the administrative process so you can apply for a hardship license. If you don't do that within 10 days of your arrest, you forego it and you're going to be on a suspended license. You can't drive while your entire case is pending. So if it takes a year to resolve your DUI, you have no license for a year. And then if you get stuck with the DUI and there's a 12-month license suspension or a 9 or a 6, then it's suspended that much longer for the imposition of the actual sentence or the disposition. So make smart choices.
One of the things you just said, if they provide that service, what do you mean by that?
A lot of lawyers won't, or if they're going to do it, they're going to keep charging you more and more and more and more money. So for example, for me, I'm not greedy. I like working. I really enjoy being in that courthouse. It's a wonderful thing to do. And I enjoy that life. So I don't bang people out for money when a lot of other guys do. I know guys that handle misdemeanor DUIs that charge $5,000, $10,000 a DUI. I mean, in my opinion, that's criminal. You can get the money, great, do it. I'm not about that life at all. I will do for the same $10,000 that one guy does for a DUI, and they may get 1 or 2 that entire year. I will literally have provided that same service and probably given better representation to 40 people. And I will have charged them anywhere between $1,500 and $2,500 a DUI. And look how much more money I've made at that time while also
doing what you love,
helping people and giving them the opportunity to afford someone that's good.
So you're actually providing the service to help them get their hardship license after the fact.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you know how my office works. But for example, at my office, I have this wonderful gal that sits at the front desk by the name of Connie.
Give a shout out to Connie real quick.
Yes, man. Yes, sir.
When you guys call in, you're going to speak to Connie, and she's the best. Don't worry.
Don't mess with her, but and she does all the administrative stuff for all of our clients, and it's always included within my fee. So I never charge anything more for doing that.
All right. So again, guys, these are things that you really should be paying attention to when we talk about, what steps you could take. This, DUIs are not cheap. You're going to be dealing with some stuff for quite a while. So having an attorney that is willing to take these extra steps for you, remove some of the burden off your plate. You're going to have plenty of stuff to deal with on your own and not continuously try to add fees, I think is very important. So make sure you're asking these questions when you're reaching out to somebody, if you're not reaching out to Eric Clayman directly, and the contact information below. All right. So now we have our hardship, right? What's next? Where do they go from there?
Now it's on the lawyer. I mean, in Florida, we have this wonderful thing called deposition practice. You don't get it in federal court, and you don't get it in a lot of other state courts. So what I can do for Broward County alone, we're going to talk about Broward here. Out of all the county criminal divisions, which are misdemeanor cases where DUIs are typically filed, 85% of the judges will automatically allow you to take depositions. There's about 15% that don't, and all you have to do is file a paper motion, a good faith motion, alleging what witnesses you want to take the depositions of and why. So what I do, and the reason that that's important, and most lawyers don't do it for 2 reasons. 1, it takes time. 2, it's difficult. You got to figure it out. You got to know the law and you got to know case law and you got to be a nerd about your craft and like be excited about what you're doing. So every time I take a deposition, I'm taking a deposition of a stopping officer and the DUI investigator. I'm going to eventually pit them against one another. One of them is going to start saying things that the other one did or didn't do and vice versa. And eventually I'm going to find issues that are inconsistencies that I'll blow up in a trial that usually help secure an acquittal for my client. But along the way, many times we get these nuggets and we look for, did the officer have, first of all, was there a valid basis for the stop? Usually it's predicated on a traffic infraction. So once a police officer has probable cause for a traffic infraction, like you're speeding, you crossed over the dotted line, you went through a red light, you're swerving within your lane. That's a real valid reason. And they have probable cause because it occurred in the officer's presence to stop that person to give a traffic infraction. Once they get in that car, I'm now going to evaluate what occurred during that exchange. And did law enforcement actually have reasonable suspicion at this point to believe that somebody was impaired? Because they need that reasonable suspicion to ask someone like you to blow or to do SFSTs. And I get them all the time. I don't win every single one of them because the system is, I don't want to say that it's rigged, but the system is created in a way to assist prosecution. It's not done in a way to help the defense lawyer. It's not done in a way to help a defendant or a suspect. They want to get convictions.
So let me ask you this, Mike. Is the smell of alcohol probable cause for an officer?
Well, let's talk about the terms of art that you did. We're not at probable cause yet. We're talking about reasonable suspicion.
A reasonable suspicion.
All right. So there's a difference. Reasonable suspicion is some sort of articulable fact or set of circumstances that may make it appear that a crime was just committed, is currently being committed, or is about to be committed. Okay. Probable cause are a definitive set of factual circumstances that tend to show that something occurred. So when you're developing reasonable suspicion to conduct a DUI investigation, that's the first benchmark to conduct that investigation and to detain someone further or longer than what's necessary to issue the traffic citations. Then once they've built their probable cause, after having reasonable suspicion, then they get to arrest that ass.
So would the smell of like alcohol, even marijuana, right?
Sure, it's a part of it. It's a part of it. It's a part of reasonable suspicion, but it doesn't mean anything. And your next question is, Eric, why? It's not illegal to drink and drive in the state of Florida. It's not illegal to drink and drive in most states. It's illegal to drink and drive at a point in which your faculties are impaired, so you cannot safely operate a motor vehicle.
I guess I would go the same thing with marijuana or anything else, right?
Yeah, I mean, I could sit there at a bar, I hadn't had anything to drink, and I could down 5 shots of tequila and then get in the car and be in the car for 30 seconds, reek like a tequila factory, but the alcohol hasn't been metabolized by my system yet and has had no effect on me yet. So if they stop me at that point, it would be a BS DUI. There's nothing there, and it would be beat. Now, had I done those 5 shots and I waited around at the bar for 15 or 20 minutes and then I got in my car and 10, 15 minutes into my drive, they stopped me. Now we're talking, it's a little bit of a different situation.
Listen, Eric, I appreciate you being here. We got a lot, we definitely got a lot of information, got to know you a little bit. So if you're looking for a criminal defense attorney, not just DUI, but any area of criminal defense, correct? From a petty misdemeanor to a first-degree murder, reach out to Eric Clayman, ericclaymanlaw.com. The phone number below, all his contact information will be in the description. I appreciate you coming, and let's make it happen.
Thanks for having me, brother.